Fellas, it is finally time, as Kisaki's and Reiho's banners are at long last arriving to Blue Archive Global this Tuesday, as part of the new Descent of the Five Senses event. Plus, Shani and Casual Saya's banners will also be rerunning alongside the new banners. For this video, I will mainly be reviewing Kisaki, while Reiho will be reviewed in a separate video, which should hopefully be uploaded about a day or two after this video is up. Anyways, without further ado, here is a short review of Kisaki. Boys, you're excited, I'm excited, and who can blame us? Cause the beautiful, cute, cool, classy, fucking smoking hot and sexy Hamna president of Genryumon is here. It's Kisaki! Color me surprised when she was first announced, cause I really thought she would be an anniversary unit since she's such a popular, prominent character. But hey, I ain't complaining cause she's here at long last. Plus, it takes off the pressure a little bit by being a permanent unit. Now, some of you might think she looks plain, but for me, I love her design. For one, I dig that beautiful black hair that's tied into a hair buns and those tiny twin tails trailing out of them. And the butterfly ornament is a nice addition too. It certainly adds a touch of class, fitting for the president of Genryumon. Not only that, her entire ensemble just makes her even more irresistible. We've got that black sleeveless hot qipao exposing those yummy delicious armpits. And it is short enough to accentuate those short slender legs. And good golly gumdrops, look at those tiny tits barely poking out of it. I also like that she's wearing a coat over her qipao, spotlighting her coolness and professionalism. Plus, she looks even more like a triad boss. Not to mention, I like her whole Chinese dragon inspired look, such as the dragon pattern on her qipao and her EX animation where a golden dragon floats around her as she sits majestically. Other than her design, I am a huge fan of her kudere personality too, as well as her playful teasing sides that she sometimes shows. Man, maybe I do have a thing for calm, reasonable women, huh? And for those of you who aren't into kuderes, well, don't worry. Spoilers ahead for the upcoming event story, cause we also have Kiki, an outgoing kindergarten version of her who just wants to play with sensei all night long. All in all, I really love Kisaki. I love her design. I think she's adorable, cool, beautiful, and sexy. Her kudere-ness is right up my alley. Plus, I really respect her efforts in doing what's best for Shanghai Jing and becoming a good leader. One last thing for my Hina bros out there who are jealous of your wife's competitor, seeing that they are both Kani leaders who love sensei and they share the same birthday, well, why not just have both of them in bed? I mean, men have two balls for a reason, you know? So, what kind of student is Kisaki? Well, she is a permanent special sonic supporter whose terrain moods are as follows: B combat power in urban terrains, D combat power in field, and S combat power indoors. She also uses these equipment, shoes, badge, and necklace, with the necklace helping to improve her shoes' durability. Time to take a look at her skills. Firstly, with her 3-cost EX, she increases one unit's EX skill damage for 15 seconds. And her basic skill, which procs every 35 seconds, grants a shield to the ally with the lowest HP for 17 seconds. Her enhanced skill boosts her healing, and her sub-skill increases the cost recovery of the entire team. At UE 40, her enhanced skill plus further improves her buff retention, and at UE 50, her indoor combat power is upgraded from S to SS. So, how good is Kisaki? Well, she is one of the best and most useful special hyper buffers in the game, as she has an extremely powerful skill set. Firstly, her EX is the most important aspect of her kit, as she can increase one unit's EX skills damage by a whopping flat 80% at max level, basically nearly doubling that student's DPS. And this is currently one of the best damage increasing buffs in the game, being more valuable than even attack or crit damage buffs in regards to boosting the power of EX skills. Thus, this has allowed her to become an essential hyper buffer for DPS units whose damage output mainly comes from their EX skills, as she can greatly improve their damage. Not to mention, her value is further increased since she is the only unit in the game so far who can apply this buff. Not only that, you can also stack her EX skill damage buff with attack, crit damage, and type effectiveness buffs. So for instance, one of the best team combinations is pairing Kisaki with Ako, a special crit hyper buffer, Camp Hare for her attack buff, and one of New Year Kayoko, Swimsuit Ui or Swimsuit Hoshino for their mystic / piercing / explosive effectiveness buffs respectively depending on the student. Plus there's also Ryo, who is an extremely powerful partner for Kisaki since she can copy an EX skill as well as provide an attack buff, though it isn't as potent as Camp Hare's or Himari's. Hence, by combining all these together, she is able to turn your damage dealer into an absolute monster, capable of shredding through the enemy. Kisaki can also plant this buff for the low cost of 3, and while it only lasts for a short 15 seconds, this duration is kind of the standard for hyper buffers. I mean, look at Ako and Himari. Another thing to note is that while this buff can and has made weaker students whose damage output comes from their EX become more valuable, it is still more effective to use her EX on harder hitting damage dealers, cause it's basically letting the strong become stronger. With all that being said, remember the caveat to this buff is that it only affects EX skills, not basic skill, normal attacks or whatever else. Meaning it won't be as effective on units who have self-buff EXs or those whose damage output comes from other sources, and it can be pretty conditional depending on the unit you're applying the buff onto. Some examples of units who are very compatible with her EX's buff would be Swimsuit Hanako, Iori, and Dress Hina, where you would use their EX then instantly apply Kisaki's onto them, letting them deal tons of damage. On the other hand, students such as Izuna, Ben Yoshimi, Maid Momoi, Shiroko Terra, etc. won't benefit from her EX's buff, not just cause theirs are self-buffs and don't do damage, but also cause they are AA units, i.e. their firepower primarily derives from their normal attacks and basic skills. Even for someone like Swimsuit Nonomi or Sakurako, who can dish out damage with their EX, they still mainly rely on their basic skills / normal attacks. So ideally, you wouldn't use Kisaki in an AA focused team. Instead, you're better off using Himari since her potent attack buff is much more beneficial for these students. Speaking of, for those of you wondering if Kisaki or Himari is better, well, it depends on the units you're using and the content you're doing. Kisaki's EX skill damage buff is more useful at increasing your hyper carry's damage, especially those with powerful damaging EX skills, as well as unique units like Chiaki, who cannot crit with her EX, or Mika, who is guaranteed crit so they don't need Ako, or those who already get a lot of attack buffs from their basic / enhanced / sub skills like Kazusa, cause it provides a flat 80% damage boost, allowing her to often be used in first teams now since she is able to help one team a lot of content. However, again, Himari is preferred when using AA units or tackling content that requires said AA students. Plus, she is also still extremely useful for second teams or for players who don't have Kisaki. Ultimately, Kisaki doesn't necessarily replace Himari, as the latter is still one of the best hyper buffers. Rather, it boils down to the team you're running and the content you're taking on. And oftentimes, you would run both of them in separate teams, especially in content that require these multiple teams. Plus, even though you can technically run both of them in the same team, it would be a bit of a waste since their sub-skills cost recovery won't stack. Moving on, Kisaki's basic skill is really helpful in providing some survivability, as she can grant a decently strong shield whose HP is equal to 131% of a healing at max level skill for 17 seconds, which isn't a very long time, but it's still acceptable, and its proc time of 35 seconds is also quite average. Plus, she gives it to the student with the lowest HP, allowing her to save them from the brink of death if it activates at the right time. Though do be careful if you're using someone who can also give a barrier through their basic like New Year Fuka, since it may override her shield, though this isn't a big deal unless you're in a dire situation. Her enhanced skill improves her healing, directly boosting her shield's durability, and her enhanced skill plus increases her buff retention by 19%. So her EX's buff duration is up to around 17 to 18 seconds, while her shield lasts for a little longer at 20 seconds. While this might seem like a minuscule increase, it is actually very handy, especially for her EX, since your DPS unit can use their EX skill twice in one rotation, as they will still have her buffed by the time their second EX card reappears. And this is vital for players who know how and want to min-max these few additional seconds to get a high score in / speedrun rates. Though if you aren't interested in those and you're just aiming for a clear, then 3-star Kisaki is more than enough. finally, her sub-skill is one of the best in the game, increasing your entire team's cost recovery by 20.2% at level 10 skill, joining the few students who have this universal buff on their sub. And this is extremely useful cause your cost meter will go brr, letting you activate your EX skills much quicker, and you would definitely feel the difference between having someone who has this buff versus a unit who doesn't. All in all, Kisaki is currently among the best hyper buffers in the game, as her ability to increase one unit's EX skill damage by a whole 80% is unmatched. And she also has a lot of utility in the rest of her kit, like shields for survivability and increased cost recuv. Now, where can Kisaki be used in? Well, as a powerful flexible hyper buffer, Kisaki has seen a lot of use in almost every content due to her EX skill strong buff and especially her universal sub skill. From low leveled stuff like regular missions / event stages and joint firing drills to endgame content like raids and final restriction. Heck, she even sees a bit of use in PvP, cause her improved cost recovery is needed in that mode, though she doesn't exactly replace Swimsuit Shiroko and is more of a good substitute in PvP. In terms of raids, she can be used in nearly every single one, being brought into most Sensei's teams, especially since she is now able to help one team a number of these raids even on Torment, though definitely not Lunatic, plus there are still some raids that we need to test her in, such as Ghost and Shirokuro, whether buffing someone like Maid Aris / Wakamo with Kisaki would be better than the Shiroko Terra Hyper Carry strat and HOD / Pararodzilla, since they haven't featured even after her release. Regardless, she is often used in many players' first teams, since her buff is once again the best at increasing a unit's EX damage. So, you would use her EX alongside other students' buffs like Akko, Yuya Fuka, Camp Hare, etc. in order to turn your DPS unit into a powerhouse, allowing them to destroy the boss and potentially one-teaming the raid. Though for striker hyper buffers, you need to take into account armor type and adjust your team comp if needed. An example of this would be the Hyrule raid in JP a few months back, where the strat was to apply Kisaki's EX skill damage buff, as well as dress Akko's crit buffs, Swimsuit Hoshino's and Nagisa's explosive effectiveness buffs onto Toki to significantly amp up her EX's damage, resulting in her shredding through our local punching bag, and many senseis were able to one-team this boss even on Torment. Another instance would be the Kurokage Grand Assault in JP around a week ago, where one-team Insane / Torment was very much doable by boosting Swimsuit Hanako's damage with Kisaki, Kikyo, and Dress Aru, while increasing her attack and duplicating her EX even further with Rio. For those content that still require more than one team, like Cheese, Kaiten, Bina, and Wakamo Hovercraft, Kisaki is still an extremely important unit in a lot of players' teams, as she is a huge help in clearing them. Plus again, you would use her in one of your teams and Himari in another, since their potent buffs and cost acceleration are highly beneficial. However, keep in mind that in order to one-team most raids, you of course still need to have the appropriate units, strategies, as well as understanding of the raid, and you can't expect to immediately clear it by just bringing in Kisaki. However, there are certain content that Kisaki isn't as effective in. For instance, in specific niche Gregorious teams that rely on special units, though most just employ Dress Hina with her anyways. For this raid, the newest Gebura raid, which mainly requires special damage dealers like Satsuki, Hibiki, and Swimsuit Fubuki, since striker students deal 75% less damage. Strategies that utilize AA units such as certain Shirokuro / Ghost teams, etc. And finally Fury of Set, cause AA units are heavily preferred in this mode as the power of EX skills is lowered by 80%. One last thing to note is that there are currently many hyper buffers in the game so far, and more are coming soon to global like Rio. Unfortunately, there are only so many places in the team, aka 6, not counting in final restriction, with buffers taking up at most 2 to 4 spots. Hence, you need to seriously consider who to bring into your team, as you need to take into account the content you're tackling, the DPS units you're using, as well as the need for other kinds of students like healers or those who can fulfill the boss's mechanics. So while you can definitely use Kisaki in most content, you also have to keep in mind your team composition. Overall, should you pull or skip Kisaki? Well, in my opinion, I would label her as a must-pull unit, as she is one of the best hyper buffers in the game, to the point where she has become a meta-defining student, and she will be a massive help in clearing a whole bunch of content, not to mention she is presently the only unit in the game so far who has the EX skill damage buff. Not only that, her sub-skill itself is another reason to get her, cause it makes her universally useful. Plus, if you don't have any of the other students with the same sub-skill, you may obtain your first through Kisaki. Thus, with all these, I would strongly advise getting Kisaki, particularly cause you will have an easier time in a lot of content, plus many players will also have her in their teams, making it harder to get a high score / platinum rank since you would be competing with them. With all that being said, if you prefer to just stick to Akko and Himari or whoever instead, perhaps cause you don't care about getting a high score / plat rank in raids, maybe cause you're a casual gamer or you believe in gold looks better anyways, RG don't know, or you don't care about permanent units and only pull for limiteds, then sure, you may skip her and save for other upcoming units. However, I would still personally recommend pulling Kisaki cause she will greatly help in clearing more content, and in my opinion, she is much more important and meta compared to someone like the idol girls. Though if you wanna prioritize other future units, maybe cause they're your favorite girls, then I respect your decision. If she is your waifu though, and I know there are tons of you who are Kisaki enjoyers, then don't hesitate to pull and have a great time in bed with her and Hina. And that's all for this review. Again, remember that the Reiho review will be done in a separate video, which will be uploaded soon. Anyways, let me know if you're pulling for Kisaki, good luck with your pulls, and I'll see y'all in the next one.